Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the conference. The time for small snack is over, and I hope we can continue. The topic of this part of the conference is integrating climate mitigation and biodiversity regeneration in food system transformation. So let me introduce our guests, which will be with us at this part of the conference. And let me welcome Jürgen Tak, Scientific Director, European Landowners Organization. Hello, Mr. Tak. Mr. Jürgen Tak in 2000 joined the team of the Belgian Biodiversity Platform, where he was responsible for European and international science policy in the field of biodiversity and biodiversity-related research. In 2007, Mr. Tak became the CEO of the Research Institute for Nature and Forest. 2016, he took the position of Scientific Director at the European Landowners Organization. He also coordinates several EU projects on private land conservation by individual private landowners. On behalf of ILO, he chairs the European Commission's large carnivore platform and acts as expert for the EU Biodiversity Platform and the EU Expert Group on Culture Heritage. So that's a little CV for Mr. Tak. Another guest is Barbara Pia Oberg, Policy and Project Officer, European Regional Office in Brussels, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and where one of her key focus areas is sustainable agriculture. She has background in sustainable development. She has previously worked as a consultant at ECORIS, carrying out research projects to inform EU environmental policy, and she was also trainee at the European Commission, focusing on agri-environment climate measures and focusing on nationally appropriate mitigation actions. So that's a little CV of Barbara Pia Oberg. Petr Adler, Head of Sales and Country Leader from Syngenta, Czech Republic. Petr Adler studied at the Czech University of Life Sciences and he started working in farming in 1988 and moved into sales position in 1992 in multinational crop protection and seeds businesses. In 1996, he became a commercial manager for Monsanto, and 2010 he joined Syngenta as a commercial head for Czech and Slovak Republic. And Dr. Miroslava Bavorová, she's a professor at the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague, and she received her PhD in agriculture from the University of Göttingen. Since 2002, she has held a position as a researcher in Halle, and since 2008 till 17 at the Martin Luther University in Halle-Wittenberg. Her research is interdisciplinary and mainly based on economic, sociologic, and psychologist theories. She is interested in analyzing actors' behavior regarding environment, food safety and security, migration, and willingness to work in agriculture, as well as consumer behavior. So, and now, ladies and gentlemen, let me open another part of this discussion, and maybe I will give space for your opinion and statements, and maybe we can start with Mr. Jürgen Tak. So I will give you the Mr. Tak.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to say, what do you do if you want to create a real challenge then you take a title in which you put at the same time climate change, biodiversity loss, and food. 3 problems we have to tackle, and all 3 of them are related. We know that climate change, rising temperatures, that in reality, let's say, the average temperature is moving up 350 meters a year towards the poles. That means for the northern hemisphere, we go to the North Pole. The same is happening on the southern hemisphere, but towards the South Pole. But that makes that, let's say, part of our biodiversity, which is not able to move, stays behind. But the biodiversity which is able to move tries to move polewards. That makes that certain insects, certain mammals, and so on, do come and enter new habitats where they do not always find the necessary food. And there we have a certain risk that, let's say, the way that we are doing biodiversity conservation today is leading to biodiversity loss. But that's not the only problem. Also, the way we do agriculture can lead to biodiversity-related problems. Also, the climate is adding to that, but the 3 are interrelated. Now, in general, there are 2 strategies to battle climate change. We can go for adaptation or we can go for mitigation. Now, adaptation is a very typical strategy, I would say, for individuals. We are not capable of tackling mitigation related strategies, so we go for adaptation. Mitigation is a more typical strategy for either larger organizations, governments, and so on. Now, farmers are typical individuals, so let's say they have been working around adaptation for decades. Just to give you a few examples, let's take the example of corn in Europe. We see that there is an increase of corn production in Europe, which is not only related to the fact that we need the corn to feed our animals. It is also because, let's say, the temperature conditions are much better to have corn in our fields than it was before. And we now have, let's say, yields at a level that corn is becoming an interesting agricultural crop. If we go to South Africa, and we take the Granny Smith, the green apple, which was at a certain moment more or less the symbol of the South African Cape province. Well, the apple fell literally out of the African continent. And now it's, let's say, most of the cultivation of the Granny Smith variety is in the northern part of Africa. If you go to France, we have Champagne. Also, the major champagne houses are buying land today in the UK because, let's say, the conditions are better there to produce a good quality champagne. So there we see that farmers are adapting. Now, with the more recent European policies, and I'm thinking about the Green Deal, Farmtofork, Fit for 55, the new Common Agricultural Policy, what we see that we have a shift, or that we are trying to realize a shift from adaptation to mitigation. So we are going to sequester carbon, reduce emissions, improve soils. And I would say carbon farming, for me, is the first serious attempt to create an ecosystem service. An ecosystem service for which we can pay. And that makes that, let's say, if we are able to further develop that concept of ecosystem services, that we are not increasing the risk for farmers, but we could decrease the risk for farmers if we are not only paying for the food they produce, but also for the services they produce. Now, because of that, we see that today farmers in general are developing a positive attitude towards as well adaptations as mitigation strategies for climate change. Now, the relationship between farmers and biodiversity is a little bit more complicated. Now, first of all, farmers and biodiversity are competing for land, and we see that nature conservation and farming is quite often taking opposite approaches. As I said, agriculture, we have adaptation, now slowly moving to mitigation. In nature conservation, we are going especially for mitigation, which is, and quite often nature conservation is strongly opposed to adaptation because, let's say conservation, I would say, is almost the opposite because we want to create something and we want to keep something, we want to conserve something. And then we see that strict protection of habitats while species are moving is not always a logic choice. We also see our forests are dying because of changing climatic conditions, but mixing of non-native species remains problematic in most of the European countries. Different approach between agriculture and nature conservation is also the land sharing versus the land sparing, where we on one side are trying to create a patchwork of low-intensity farming incorporating natural elements. Mm-hmm. On the other side, we have the land sparing, where we are trying to separate those areas and where we are trying to have regions with strict protected areas, national parks and so on, versus more intensified agriculture. What we also see, and that is something I find very strange, that is the introduction of more and more result-based measures in agriculture. So a farmer can get environmental-related subsidies on the condition that he's also proving to create biodiversity. On the side of nature conservation organizations, they are already getting subsidies for 50 years, and we are still losing biodiversity. So where is the result-based measure on that side? Now, the question was asked this morning, do we need an evolution or a revolution? I think that in general we have a tendency that, let's say, to take more extreme positions in the discussion and the debate on agriculture and biodiversity. And for private landowners, the land is their capital. That makes if they can keep the land in a good quality, that's good because you can give your capital to the next generation. But to keep it in a good quality, they need also a sustainable business model. And so, while private landowners are very much aware that biodiversity loss and climate change has to be tackled, they also need a business model to enable them to protect the land on which they are living. Why are we not favoring a 100% intensive agriculture or not a 100% strict protection? No, I think we need, in reality, a good mix of both. And that is a message which is extremely difficult to bring to the audience today, because with social media, what we see is that, social media is promoting more extreme opinions, which is logic. If on Twitter you only have 180 characters, it's much easier to be 100% for something or 100% against something, but as soon as you use the word but, and you want to bring some nuance in the discussion, it's almost becoming impossible. Today, also because of the Ukrainian war, food security is again on the agenda. It was something we tackled after the Second World War, but it's back there. And at the basis of action towards climate and biodiversity, I have to say I've been working for 12 years in Africa. If people are hungry, climate change and biodiversity loss is not of importance. But at the same time, let's say that same food security is linked to climate change and biodiversity loss, because the biodiversity loss and the climate change is having a negative effect on the food security. The present world is becoming more and more complex. So we need more experts. But what is the problem with an expert? They know more and more about less and less until the moment that they know everything about nothing. So we certainly need people with a helicopter view, with a better overview. And that are the people who know less and less about more and more until they know nothing about everything. Now, the message I would like to bring is that what I think we need in this debate is much more nuanced opinions. But as I said, they are not doing well in social media communication. They are not doing well in present-day politics. But at the same time, I think it's the only way forward in a world becoming more and more complex, and in a world where we have to combine solutions for biodiversity, solutions for climate, and solutions for food security.
The land is a capital for landowners. We heard from Jürgen talk, but I think that that's capital for the people on all over the world. Sure, of course. So thank you very much. And opening speech for Barbara Pia-Oberg. And I think 5 minutes, it's yours.
Hey, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really sad that I'm not able to be there with you in person. I now feel like
So
the
we
Wizard
are.
of Oz. So I hope I'm, anyway, basically, I'm here today to represent biodiversity a little bit in this discussion. So IUCN, we are a global membership composed of government and civil society organizations, and our focus is on tackling the challenge of nature and biodiversity loss, which together with climate change, these are really two interlinked existential crises and two sides of the same coin. And we often act as a convener and a facilitator with the aim of supporting societies to conserve nature. And in this spirit, we also recently became a strategic partner of the FFA. So why is agriculture a key focus for IUCN? Well, you know, a lot of these pressures, the pressures that agriculture as we know it today poses on biodiversity are substantial. IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species assesses over 112,000 species, and of these, nearly a third are threatened with extinction. The International Resource Panel tells us that more than 90% of biodiversity loss is due to the extraction and processing of natural resources. And this year, the Global Land Outlook report by the UNCCD showed us that up to 40% of the planet's land is already degraded. Globally, food systems are responsible for 80% of deforestation, 7% of freshwater use, and are the single greatest cause of terrestrial biodiversity loss. And at the same time, of course, we know that agriculture very much relies on biodiversity, on these crucial ecosystem services. We need healthy soils and water, and of course, a climate that's conducive for farming. And it can also be costly not to address these challenges. According to the IPBES, just one more statistic, up to $577 billion in annual global crop output is at risk as a result of pollinator loss. So at IUCN, we are increasingly focusing on supporting the transition to sustainable agriculture and food systems. And at the European Regional Office where I work, and our focus is on EU policy, we've been supporting the transition in two main ways. One is to develop the knowledge that we need to support the transition. So we published a report recently on approaches to sustainable agriculture. And here we examined 14 approaches and compiled over 180 terms related to sustainable agriculture in a way to clarify, to provide some clarity around the concept of sustainable agriculture and the pathways that we have available to us. And we are this year developing two new reports. One is to link nature-based solutions in agriculture, and another one is to clarify the landscape in a similar way as we did for approaches now around metrics or ways to measure the environmental sustainability of agricultural approaches. And our other area of work is, of course, convening and facilitating stakeholder dialogues to support the transition. We've thus far mainly been engaged in discussions around agriculture, food production, but dialogue along the whole food value chain we know is essential for the transition, and this is really our next focus and very relevant for this session. So our work has brought to the forefront some valuable insight already in terms of what can help in the transformation. It's no longer a question of whether we need it, but it's still a question of how do we best get there. And so, of course, we have these 14 potential pathways, but also more. We've got regenerative agriculture, agroecology, and organic farming, and I think some speakers will touch upon some of these today. But we know that each approach is valid in a given set of circumstances. They have a number of important commonalities, but it's also their diversity that is a strength in itself. And I want to just touch upon what Jürgen was saying in terms of land sparing and land sharing. It's not really a choice of going all the way one or the other way, but it's about a combination of what makes sense in the circumstances that you're dealing with. But we also know that it's not just about how we produce our food. There are lots of different questions to be tackled that concern the whole food value chain. For instance, not only how, but how much food we produce and how much of it we waste, which is about a third, which is a lot. What kinds of food we are producing and consuming, because we know that different foods have different impacts on health and on the environment. And so we can look at, well, what do we need that can help in the food system transformation? And something we can discuss, and we will discuss here today. New knowledge is certainly useful. Constructive dialogue is the best way forward. But we also need to do more. We need to do more quickly. We don't have the luxury of time to get to perfect solutions, but the good thing is we already have tools available, pathways to sustainable agriculture, metrics and labels which exist and already have markets associated with them, and policy measures like agro-environmental climate measures or eco-schemes under the new Common Agricultural Policy. And yes, we need to invest in our future. So another thing that we'll talk about today, I'm sure, is the cost of the transition. But we are already subsidizing agriculture today. And what we need to do is invest in the transformation to a sustainable system, and that includes redirecting subsidies to sustainable agriculture. So I'd like to think of it as a way of paying a mortgage instead of paying rent. So with subsidies that are not contributing to the transition, we are thinking in the shorter term, and we're paying rent month to month, harvest to harvest, and so on. But if we're thinking in the longer term, we are paying our mortgage, and then by 2030, perhaps our investments will have paid off with thriving biodiversity, ecosystem services, healthy soils, clean water, a favorable climate, all the things which we need for food production to be viable in the future. And we definitely need food production to be viable in the future. And a lot can be done in just this way. I just want to highlight a recent report by the Nature Conservancy, who are also a partner of the FFA, that we could close the nature funding gap with what the world currently spends on cigarettes or soft drinks in a single year. And more significantly, nearly half of the nature funding gap that we have could be closed without any new funding at all. We could unlock what we need through more efficient deployment of existing funds, smarter policy, and investment choices. Now, we can only achieve the transformation together, of course. We all have a role to play in the transformation of our food system. Everybody is part of this change, truly, from farm to fork. We need this open, constructive, and positive dialogue among all stakeholders. That is key, and the Forum for the Future of Agriculture is one such good example. And we need a strong, supportive, and coherent policy framework to help us deliver this transition. So what are some key upcoming opportunities that can help us transform our food system, looking towards the Czech presidency of the EU, which is taking place the second half of this year? These are the final moments before the new CAP begins with 2023, and the key opportunities for the current Common Agricultural Policy are in the strategic plans, which should align with the European Green Deal. But even after the plans are approved, how they will be implemented will be crucial. For example, eco-schemes, they offer opportunities for greener practices, but they remain optional measures. And we also know that another upcoming piece of legislation that is crucial will be the Sustainable Food Systems Framework Initiative. The public consultation is open until the end of July. The proposal will come out in 2023. Other policy developments. The Pollinator Initiative, Sustainable Use of Pesticides Directive are undergoing revisions. We will have a nature restoration law, and the taxonomy for sustainable activities focuses on agriculture too. So these are some opportunities where we can all call for this urgently needed transition, but also help ensure that it is a success. And just a final note, last but not least, a crucial policy development coming up during the Czech presidency, hopefully finally, is the Global Biodiversity Framework post-2020, which we have been waiting for some time. And the discussions have been delayed because of the immediate crises that we are facing, including the pandemic. While transitioning to a sustainable food system is really the only way forward if we want to reach the targets proposed by the European Green Deal and also the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This will take place, so the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, the COP15 of the CBD, will take place in Kunming later this year. This is looking to be August and September, and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will be adopted there. There are targets in the framework that are specifically relevant for the food sector, like Target 7 on reducing nutrients lost to the environment by at least half and pesticides by at least 2/3. And target 18 is about redirecting, repurposing, reforming, or eliminating incentives harmful for biodiversity. And the framework outlines that to reach these targets, we have two enabling conditions that we must meet. One is a whole of government approach. We need to ensure policy coherence and effectiveness, political will and recognition all the way to the highest levels of government. But more than a whole of government approach, also a whole of society approach that engages actors beyond national governments, including NGOs, local communities, business, finance, academia, the scientific community, citizens, all other stakeholders. And this is, I'm wrapping up. So yes, looking towards this crucial meeting in Kunming, this is where governments and societies will need to determine priorities and allocate financial and other resources to internalize the value of nature and recognize the cost of inaction. So I also look forward to hearing more from all the other speakers and ideas in the room today about how we can achieve this needed transformation together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will see what the Czech presidency will bring us in this case. So, ladies and gentlemen, it was Barbara Pia Oberč, and now I give you Mrs. Miroslava Bavorova, which is here at home.
So I'm associate professor at the...
Oh, do we have a microphone? Maybe just this. No. The microphone is here. Oh, doesn't work. I will bring you mine. Prosím, zapnout. Perfektní.
So thank you very much. So my name is Miroslava Bavorova, and I am associate professor at the Faculty of Tropical Agri-Sciences here at the Czech University of Life Sciences. And what I would like to say first, that most of the issues that I wanted to talk about were said already and were discussed. So because I am from the Faculty of Tropical Agri-Sciences, so the interests that we are dealing with are very global. So we have studies around the world, South America, Africa, Asia, but we also do some studies in the Czech Republic and in Europe, in Russia. So what I wanted to stress is that climate change and biodiversity loss is a global problem. And I have a few examples. Somehow they were mentioned here already. Also that we have the problem, Argentina produces large amount of beef meat and therefore also a large amount of methane. The meat is exported to many countries, including the Czech Republic. And then we have the question, who is responsible for the production of the methane? Are these Argentina's farmers or Argentina's politicians, or are these the Czech consumers? So difficult question. There is another issue, and it is the Ukraine exports of wood to the Czech Republic. So in the Ukraine, there is often illegal deforestation and possibly also biodiversity loss. And again, the Czech buyers buy the Ukraine wood, and we can conserve our forests. And then again, the question arises, who is responsible for this? Are these the Ukraine traders, politicians, or the Czech wood buyers? And what I think is very nice, that we have the issues taken care for globally. So the United Nations agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that the Sustainable Development Goals are very ambitious, but these are great visions for the sustainable development of life on Earth. So I think most of you know that the Sustainable Development Goal 13 is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. The 15 is to protect and sustainable manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. So we have the visions and more than 190 member states of the UN agreed on this. So we can see that the humanity has very similar values and very similar objectives. But we have to be also aware, it is what was mentioned also previously, that we have problems around the globe with poverty and with the hunger and undernourishment. So also these are the sustainable development goals to reduce poverty and to reduce the number of people who are undernourished. So what is a sad story is that the large share of food insecure people around the globe are smallholder farmers. So farmers who produce food are the most food insecure people around the world. So if you look at the policies, so it's clear that the policies in the less developed economies are mainly oriented on achieving food security. In Europe, it is interesting, at the beginning of the Common Agriculture Policy in the 50s, the main objective was also to achieve food security, because after the war, even here, we had to struggle with food insecurity. And what is a nice development, what we can see, food security was achieved quite soon in the 70s, and then we can see the development of the agriculture policy toward the environmental friendliness, production of public goods, support or providing legal background so that the consumers can receive high quality and safe products. So what I would mention here, that I have a little bit impression from the today discussion that we need more agriculture policies. And it is what I am not very sure about, that everything has to be institutionalized, and that the farmers need very specific directives, and only then they will behave somehow correctly or, environmental friendly to their land. Because as we heard before, for the farmers, they even do not want to destroy their land, especially if it is their own land. So what I somehow would support is to provide more trust to the farmers, that they take the responsibility of environmental friendly way how to produce food. And I think it is also already happening, especially in the Czech Republic. We see many good examples where the farmers use these practices. What can be the problem? That we always, as a society, we want to pay farmers for everything what they do for the environment. I think it is partly good, but again, I'm a researcher, so we learn from the theories, so that if the farmers are intrinsically motivated, so they do it because they feel well, that they save, that they do something good for the environment, so they usually provide more of such goods. And this intrinsic motivation can be destroyed by extrinsic motivation, by paying for all these services that they provide. Mm-hmm. Because they are also, we are our people, I think, and as we said around the world, everybody wants that the environment, the biodiversity, that the climate are conserved. So I would mention the example of the agriculture policy in Australia and New Zealand, because most of the countries, US, EU, always somehow say we need to protect farmers more, we need to pay more. So in some extent, it's true. But what we have to ask also, that who pays for the farmers? So these are the taxpayers, these are the consumers. So we all pay for it. It is great. So I think there is a big support among the population for the farmers, because the people are aware that it is necessary to have safe food and food production. But again, in Australia, what they did, they abolished most of the agriculture policies and the direct payments to farmers. And the policies, they have very small number of policies, and most of these policies are going to extension services, provision of training, establishment of marketing boards so that the farmers can sell their produce. So I think I would end here with...
Thank you very much. It was really interesting, payments as a positive motivation. Thank to Miroslava Bavorova, professor at the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague, and opening speech for Mr. Petr Adler from Syngenta.
Dobrý den ještě jednou.
We have some problems with
No, já si myslím, že to je dobře slyšet.
Yeah.
Jo, já se slyším.
Maybe closer
Tak je to
to your
dobrý.
mouth.
Řekl bych, že mám výhodu posledního řečníka, protože se můžu odvolat na všechny předřečníky.
I am in this luxurious situation because everything has been mentioned before, so I can only refer you back to our debate. I think it illustrates the complexity of the issues surrounding the whole of the food chain. And from the industry point of view, I believe we have the same perspective. Syngenta operates in over 100 countries of the world. So we really get to see all the real life issues that people need to face when they create agricultural produce. There are extremely wealthy countries like the EU is one of the most one of the wealthiest places on earth. So talking about undernourishment is just not relevant. But despite that, there is a foodstuffs crisis going on, and hundreds of millions of people don't have access to drinking water, to potable water. Others yet are undernourished. And this is really a reality. It can be this situation today, and the next day it can be different. Up until the COVID pandemic, we thought we were doing fine, but all of a sudden we realized that we were pretty much dependent on imports from other countries. The transportation side of things is also a very important consideration, because sometimes we are doing crazy things like transporting one item to another place while it wouldn't be necessary. We are also wasting our resources, as has been mentioned. And there is this prognosis that there'll be 10 billion people on this planet, which would mean increasing the production of today by 50%. Now, how does this go together with our perspective on trying to make things as suitable, as viable and as sustainable as possible? And I think coming to the issue of chemical substances, we being involved in this business globally, we can first of all be an entity that shares information. That's one thing. The second thing is Green Deal is a reality. Farmtofork is another reality. And we can also take this as an opportunity. I mean, I can't influence it as a business person. The farmers can't influence it either. But we talked about evolution or revolution, and I believe this is evolution. Syngenta is pretty much connected with the primary production. We are interested in delivering well-suited solutions to our farmers so that they can respond to the various political demands and requests. And we've invested billions of dollars into buying chemical substances that are bio-based, so they be by definition suitable for organic production, and the efficiency of these substances is going up, has doubled in the past years, and that is our role of Syngenta, bringing innovation to the market, sharing information, and be there for the agricultural producers, be there for the farmers, because they are the ones who share the biggest burden of the changes. They have a long cycle of seeing their investments bringing the first benefit. You just can't change a system of managing land and soil overnight. You just can't change that in agriculture. It takes years. And this is our role of the industry and also the research side of things, to prepare solutions, to come up with ideas. We can invest into it. We can put the know-how into this. And we've been talking about various technologies, such as soil improvement technologies that may be more developed in other countries than here. But we in the Czech Republic are currently facing a period of drought. And these new technologies that I'm talking about will probably be the way to reduce the use of fertilizers and also to improve the potential of the soil to capture water and ideally also increase efficiency. So this has obviously an economic bearing. So our role would be to interconnect the individual stakeholders, including the end consumer. The strategies like Farmtofork are mainly seen in the production of vegetables or fruits, because you want your apple to be ideally bio-friendly and to be organic. And let me say that Syngenta is offering technologies that allow this to happen. It's just about marketing the information, getting it to the consumer so that people do understand why this apple is more expensive than the other one. But thank God you know what you're eating. So that's my take on Syngenta's role. Okay, thank you, Mr. Adler. Peter has talked about the interconnection between the industry and the policymakers and Syngenta.
Please, again, just put your hand up and say your name and position, and our guests will answering. Does anyone have a question? Okay, we need microphone here. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alessio Agliardi. I'm an Italian farmer member of the ILO. My question is about Farm-to-Fork strategy. As was said before, 80% of the hard work is on the farmer and few it's on the consumer. I asked to Madame Bavorova that if I don't get wrong, you are a consumer behavior specialist. It's not more efficient for changing the world to change the way the consumer buy instead of impose to farmer to produce something that maybe the consumer doesn't want or at least doesn't want to pay, like biological, they want, but they want to pay less price and not a cheaper one. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
So thank you very much for the question. So I completely agree that the value chains in food value chains are driven by consumers, and it is in the market economies normal. So we have the experience still with the communist planning. So it was completely different, that the state decided how much of which products will be produced, and we know that it does not work very well. So I completely agree with the education of the consumers and the consumer. It is, I think it is this bottom-up approach, and it is what I think is good, that people take responsibility for their lives and also for the environment they are living in. So when we look, we have this discussion, meat consumption, not, yes. So I think that what we need to go is the middle way somehow, yeah. So we have countries like US who consume 120 kilograms meat per capita and year. And we have countries like Czech Republic, we consume 80 kilograms, and then we have many countries like India, Nepal, and they consume 4 kilograms meat per capita and per year. So, you know, there are many models, somehow business models or living models, how we can live. And if, you know, it is, I do not want to judge, but if you go to a village in India or in Zambia, in Africa, so you see that these people do not consume so much. Really, they have a very low consumption of everything compared to us. So I think it's that we need to have all this in our minds when we decide. I think we should have the vision, we should talk about it, we should support our farmers so that they can be profitable, that there is equity in the society. Because we have industries and, you know, if the salaries of managers in the industry is very high, so it's clear that we can't have in a society...
Mrs. Bavorova, your microphone closer.
We can't have the farm managers of big farms, and the salaries of them would be very low. So we need policies, but it should be consumer-driven, and the consumers should be educated, and I think this is what will help to create a more sustainable way of living.
Thank you for your answer.
I can make a joke that we have to convince the European Union that we are not longer communist, but we have to evolve to a market. So.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for that joke. So, does anyone in the audience want to ask our guests for anything? Yes? Yeah? Just, please give a microphone to your colleague. Yeah, it's okay? Okay. You're the next one. Mm-hmm.
Ta politika z pole na vidličku je sice...
The Farm-to-Fork policy is a beautiful idea on one hand, but I know many cooperatives that have already started that process. And if you speak to an economist, they will tell you that they are in minus numbers, in red numbers, because you know, on one hand, you have to produce livestock, but then you have to have your own slaughterhouse that will slaughter the animals. Then you have to have other experts to process the meat and marketing experts to sell the meat. So it is not easy to have your fresh meat production. I know a cooperative that processes its own fresh meat, and they produce sausages and other products, but and they have their own store. But when a consumer comes to that store, they expect the produce to be cheaper than in a supermarket. But of course, the produce is of a much, much higher quality, and people have to realize that it must be paid for. Okay, so that wasn't a question, but just an observation. And a gentleman in the second row.
My name is Adam Sebesta. I am a senior consultant in agriculture policy based in Brussels and here in Prague. I have a straightforward question. In June, so in roughly about a month, the Commission will propose its proposal for the sustainable use regulation, which was mentioned today in the morning, and which, amongst others, includes this target to reduce the synthetic pesticide by 50%. I'm wondering, in the context of the increase in food insecurity, the war in Ukraine, the rise of prices of food commodities at the moment, what are your expectations from this legislation, be it Syngenta as the industry representative, but also Barbara, your perspective, What are your expectations? How this legislation can potentially change and shift the agriculture in Europe into more sustainable one, while ideally keeping the productivity at least the current rate? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe that's a question for Petr Adler and Barbara Pia-Oberč. So, Petr.
Jak jsem už řekl, na tyhle evropský, řekněme...
Well, as I have said, we can have a look at these European incentives from various perspectives. What I think is that it's a fact that we cannot change it. We are living in this situation, and from the long term, we're going in the right direction, because we all agree that we have to keep the quality of soil and the biodiversity and natural environment to hand it over to the next generations. And Syngenta's perspective is that, first of all, we have to come up with a solution functional within these borders, within these limits. And that's what we do. We produce these innovations and we invest money into it. Second of all, we have to realize that Europe cannot produce wheat and other products for the rest of the world. We have to look where the potential is and where we can increase yields. We don't have to increase yields in Europe. We don't need to. We can even reduce the yields if it's in the interest of long-term sustainable production. And we have it in our missions and visions to produce safe and healthy foodstuffs to our consumers. So I think that the EU decided correctly what needs to be protected. But when it comes to solving food crisis, we have to reach outside of Europe, and everybody must contribute to the solution of that. Europe cannot do it all. So the business plans must become sustainable also outside of Europe.
You want to react for Mr. Adler, Barbara, or not?
I just maybe very shortly, I would add that the cost of production in the EU are very high. So if we export our products to the world market, so often we are not competitive. And the previous policies often supported the export of the products on the world market. But is it our interest? Is it interest of our taxpayers that we pay the exports of our food to the world market? So.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask Mr. Jürgen Tak. Oh, Barbara.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, and I hope that I understood the questions correctly, but just maybe because there was the question on the pesticides targets that was directed at me as well. I just wanted to say that, and then we looked at all the European targets. Yes, we have the targets to reduce pesticides in the Farmtofork, in the biodiversity strategy, so under the European Green Deal. But also there is that aim in the global biodiversity framework. So this is something that the whole globally, we need to be moving towards these targets, not only in Europe. And I quite like what the gentleman from, Mr. Adler from Syngenta was saying. Yes, it's acknowledged we need to move, we all need to evolve, and the sector needs to evolve in that direction. So that's really great to hear. And just to also emphasize why it's important, from the approaches that we have been looking into, 14 different approaches to sustainable agriculture, and a lot of them having different practices. But when you look at what they have in common, there are certain agricultural practices that all of these sustainable agricultural approaches have in common. And chief among those practices is the reduction of synthetic pesticides and mineral fertilizer use, So this is really charting the path forward that we need to go. Just to add a little comment on that as well. And I hope I understood the question correctly.
Okay,
Thanks.
that's fine. Maybe Barbara, can I ask you if how can we promote collaboration between public and between private actors and support some synergies in environmental activities and initiatives?
Well, promoting dialogue is one of the main tools and one of the most important tools that we have. So forums like this one, like the Forum for the Future of Agriculture, is a really great platform to bring these different voices together, because we need all perspectives and all opinions and everybody on board to get to this transition. And we have done something similar here in Brussels, which was interesting. We organized a series of roundtables on, at the time, this was on the new green architecture of the CAP, which is now part of the new CAP. And we did these roundtables together with directly with the European Commission, DG Agri, and the cabinet of the Commissioner for Agriculture. What was unique about these roundtables is that we brought together environmental and agricultural stakeholders active here in EU policy that normally didn't have a certain open, inclusive sort of participatory forum within which they could openly discuss. And it was a success. We presented our results to member states who wanted to do something similar at the member state level. So this was really something that we cannot be in different camps, kind of talking to the same audiences. I can't be talking to the environmental community all the time. That's not conducive. So it was really wonderful to see these different perspectives come together. And the solutions that were presented were things that were on common points. One was, for instance, on pollinators. That was a really great one that everybody could support. So we need more common points like this.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Já se jenom k tomu chtěl dodat zase takový ten český pohled.
Can I just give you the Czech perspective on this? There has been a program in the Czech Republic going on for years known as Look at the Field in translation. And it is, think of it as a get-together between the public and the industry representatives, and people, the general public, are being shown the difference between environmentally friendly ways of doing it and the traditional industrial way of doing things. So it's a form of dialogue as well. Thank you, Peter, for mentioning this, because I have this question related to it.
What do you mean? What concrete steps can help increase biodiversity in agriculture? Some concrete examples.
Well, I think the answer is in the word biodiversity itself, and that is diversity. We have to be extremely careful if you're making policy, is that we are going to tell the farmer how to run his land. The farmer is an expert in what he is doing or what she is doing, and they have a tremendous knowledge on what they are doing. Now, if you give those people diverse options, a menu of tools and instruments, and they can make their choices themselves on how to tackle the issue, they will take the responsibility. Mm-hmm. But by putting policies on the table, where you do not give the choice anymore, but where you tell the farmer what to do, he will automatically say, wait, who in Brussels or in whatever capital in Europe has to tell me how to do the job? And so by giving those people a diverse set of options and give them the liberty to make a choice how to reach the target. I think that is extremely important.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's 20 minutes past 1. I think we don't have enough time for any discussion. So maybe your last question. Okay, last question, it's up to you. And please, short answer.
Děkuji, Marcela Jezbirová.
Thank you. I'm Marcela Jezbirová from the Czech Agrarian Chamber from the district of Trutnov. I don't know whom to address this question to. We know that the common agricultural policy will be very favorable towards the farmers. We know it will be very limiting for the farmers. And I learned that even though the European Commission knows that the Czech farmers have very low levels of pesticide consumption, this is not enough. The European Commission is going to still impose certain limiting measures. And now my question is, yes, the farmers do need the subsidies, so they will certainly subscribe to the scheme, and then they will have to abide by the pesticide reduction, whatever regulation. We will reduce the arable land. We will make sure this is conducive to pollination, etc., etc. But all of that is bringing costs, and the subsidy will simply not be able to compensate for that. So you want to do something, but the competitive environment on the market will simply not ask you any questions, and simply the consumer will say, okay, I don't want to buy this, it's too expensive. Now my question is, if the common agricultural policy is going to impose a lot of duties on the backs of the farmers, how will it make sure that people will be buying these products?
The question for Mrs. Bavorova.
Okay, so it is a difficult question, yeah. So what I would believe, if the farmer would learn at the market that nobody would buy his produce, then he would have to stop the production, yeah. So somehow I believe that the farmers will use the EU subsidies only in case when it brings to them more profit than the cost. Yeah. So I even think, so we had many studies with also traders, and what they always told us, you know, we do not want to push the prices so low that we do not have competitive enterprises in the market. So they need the food. Yeah, they need that the farmers produce and they can buy. But it is, these are the market forces that has to develop the price in the market. And what, you know, there are many different aspects, but what we could expect when the food is more expensive, maybe people, the consumers, will reduce the food waste. Yeah, so it could be the effect of this. But what I agree somehow that the EU policy shouldn't be too complicated. Yeah? So it seems to me that all the agri-environmental schemes, and they are very complicated processes, and it is very difficult to understand, and especially for the farmers, it is difficult to understand. So I would say farmers are usually rational, very rational people, and they need policies that are very clear, quite simple, but achieve the goals. So I think we try to think about policies that use understanding of behavior, so the nudges nowadays, so how to achieve the policy goals with lower bureaucracy and with, you know, that letting freedom for the farmers. Yeah, so otherwise everybody is upset.
Thank you very much. Maybe my question for Mr. Tank is if he agree with Mrs. Bavorova that CAP is a little bit complicated and bureaucracy and legislation.
Well, it's overly complicated, let's say, and all of the measures which are asked towards farmers and all of the policies which are put towards farming are making things overly complicated. I think that a farmer today is doing more administration than he's actually in the field. And there too, again, give people the possibility to make choices. And I'm sure that, let's say, those choices will lead to a better way of farming and reaching those targets.
Thank you very much. Last words from Barbara Pielberg.
Yes, I like the idea very much of there being choices because we also have options. So hopefully that is something that we can already start thinking, well, it's never too soon to start thinking about the next CAP, but at what we have at this time is we need to look at the strategic plans and what's in them. What are the options given to farmers there? Are they enough? Can they help them? And that is something that we will have to follow closely. Also the implementation, once the strategic plans are finalized this year, and member states have been given a lot of freedom to design what best suits, at least at the national level. We will see how this works in the implementation. And well, maybe at the risk of bringing in more policy, but there is the Sustainable Food Systems Framework Initiative. And because the question was from the member of the audience about how we can bring in consumers more, well, I think that is the opportunity there to bring in consumers more. So the Sustainable Food Systems Framework Initiative, which is sort of like an operationalization, a word I can never pronounce, of the Farm-to-Fork strategy, there's some opportunities there to develop that well, to make sure that the whole food chain is working in harmony and there's basically everybody is playing their part and sharing in the responsibility for the transformation.
Thank you very much, Barbara. A poslední minuta patří ještě Petru Adlerovi.
Děkuju.
Závěrečná slova, možná reakce.
Last words by Mr. Adler.
Reakce, já bych řekl, že...
So my final words, my final reaction, I think that we have confirmed a number of times during the morning that we're living in a very complex legislative framework. And that's also what our colleague has said, that we have to interlink these things. They have to build on each other. They have to consider the whole context. So it's not only about the primary production of food, but all the other sectors that are building on that. So that's going back to the question whether we need an evolution or a revolution, because it seems to me that the current system is not able to function any longer. So yeah, it is a good idea to protect the soil for our children, for the future, but we've complicated our situation so much that it's not doable without a revolution.
Jürgen Tak, thank you very much. Mrs. Barbara Pia Oberst, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the interesting discussion.
Thank you. Miroslava Bavorová, thanks a lot. And Mr. Petr Adler, thank you. So I hope today's discussions have been inspiring and stimulating for all of us. Thank you that you were here, that you were giving us some inspiring questions. And the next session of today's forum has a topic, what is the type of forest we want following climate change scenarios? And from French, Czech, and SE perspective. So our guest, Alessandro Cescati, Senior Scientist, Directorate for Sustainable Resources, will be here at 14:54. So if you will be here back, so we are looking forward, and right now you have few minutes for lunch break. Have a nice time, have a nice day in Prague, and thank you very much.